By the time Emma Preston pushed open the glass door of the Cloud County Co-op, there were already 6 men around the coffee table, and one weather radio hissing in the corner like a nervous snake. Her boots left a thin trail of dust from the yard. She wore tan coveralls patched at both knees with darker canvas squares, and there was a nick in the sleeve where barbed wire had caught her 2 springs earlier. Her hair was shoved under a faded cap from a seed dealership that had gone out of business in 2017. Outside, her pickup sat crooked in the gravel lot. An 18-year-old Chevy with a cracked windshield running from the passenger edge toward the rearview mirror like dry lightning. One taillight was held in place with red tape. The bed carried 2 coils of polyline, a toolbox with no lid, and a coffee can full of bolts. Across from her, Wade Klein stirred powdered creamer into his cup with the plastic confidence of a man who had never once worried if a check would clear. He had come in wearing a pressed pearl snap shirt and a watch face big enough to read from 3 chairs away. His new diesel, dually out front, still had dealer plates. "Morning, Emma," Wade said in the tone people used when they meant, "Bless your heart. You still running that antique planter?" She smiled once. "If it places seed straight, it ain't antique." The table laughed politely, not with her. Roger Bell, who sold chemicals and loved napkin math, tapped his pen against a crop budget sheet. "Corn seeds, $118 an acre this year," he said. "Fertilizers, another $162 if you don't want to starve it. Fuel and chemicals, call it $94. You don't scale at those numbers, you disappear." He looked at Emma when he said disappear. Everyone knew she still planted milo and alfalfa on big chunks of her acres. In a year when high-input corn was the brag crop, that looked to many like surrender, or poverty disguised as tradition. "Some folks just can't chase modern," Wade said. He kept his eyes on his cup, as if kindness required not looking directly at the person being dismissed. "Nothing wrong with hanging on." Emma drank her coffee black and said nothing. She had learned long ago that silence was cheaper than proving herself to men who measured solvency by paint color and monthly payment size. What they never counted, sitting there beneath ads for zero-down equipment financing, was her arithmetic. It wasn't complicated, just unpopular. Over 27 years, she had bought only land she could service in 7 years or less. She never carried operating debt through winter. She treated every avoided 8.25% interest payment like guaranteed yield, because unlike rain, that return showed up every single year. At the coffee table, she looked to them like somebody one bad season from auction. In her ledger, she looked like weatherproofing. Emma had not been born cautious. She had been made that way on a Wednesday in February of 2001 in a bank office that smelled like carpet glue and old paper. Her father, Del Preston, sat stiff in a vinyl chair with his hat in his lap, while a loan officer slid a yellow legal pad across the desk and said, "I'm sorry, Del. We can renew, but not at the old terms." The old terms had been survivable. The new terms weren't. Del had leased 320 acres on a handshake for years, and when prices dipped and one dry spell stacked onto another, he had carried operating notes farther than he wanted. Then rates rose. Interest started compounding faster than yields recovered. He was a good farmer and a weak negotiator. The exact profile banks called high character, elevated risk. Emma was 23, sitting one chair over, taking notes because her father's hands shook whenever numbers were spoken aloud. She watched the loan officer circle a figure. 9.0% variable. Del asked very quietly, "What if we strip expenses and run lighter?" The officer gave him a look that was almost pity. At this point, Mr. Preston, it's a liquidity issue. Liquidity. Emma hated the word for years because it sounded like something smooth being poured over a man's throat. By October, they gave up the lease. The renter who took those 320 acres next came in with newer equipment and a bigger line of credit. People called it inevitable. Emma called it interest dressed up as destiny. After her father died in 2004, she inherited not much money and plenty of caution. She got a legal pad and wrote, in block letters at the top of page 1, 1. Never borrow for pride. 2. Land must pay for itself in less than or equal to 7 years. 3. No operating debt after harvest. 4. If interest can kill you, it is not a tool. It looked extreme to everyone except her. She began with 240 acres, most of it uneven and not glamorous. Some inherited, some purchased in pieces from families wanting out. The first tract she bought alone was 80 acres east of a shelter belt, financed at a fixed 6.1% when rates looked cheap to neighbors chasing expansion. She paid it off in 5 years and 8 months by selling grain in disciplined increments instead of waiting for perfect tops, by repairing instead of replacing, and by refusing to let a good year inflate her permanent costs. She took seasonal side work, too, custom baling, fence repair, hauling, money many operators considered beneath them. Emma considered it non-correlated cash flow. If corn failed, fence posts still broke and needed replacing. In 2008, when machinery dealers pushed 12-year notes with low teaser payments, she drove to auctions with a legal envelope and a hard cap, what the machine would cost including repairs over 10 years, not what she could afford per month. She bought a used grain drill for $11,400 cash that needed opener discs, bearings, and patience. Total rehab cost $3,260. Equivalent new model on offer that season, $68,000 financed. She kept records in ledgers first, then backed them up in a spreadsheet her niece built. She tracked weird things nobody asked about at tax time. Cost per greased fitting, average tire life by brand, gallons burned per tillage, pass by field slope, the implied interest saved when she delayed a purchase 6 months and paid cash. When others bragged about acreage controlled, Emma counted only acreage owned clear or on fixed terms she could end quickly. It made her look small in bull market years. It made her sleep in dry years. The single splurge in her life came from fear, not vanity. In the years after that bank office day, she kept coming back to one low draw on the north edge of a parcel where spring runoff lingered longer than expected. Most people saw muddy nuisance water. Emma saw storage. She spent long evenings reading water rights documents and sat through conservation meetings where attendance rarely hit double digits. Eventually, she found a legal path for off-channel capture tied to runoff rights, provided every permit, meter, and reporting requirement was done exactly right. She committed serious money to it over time, enough that friends called it reckless, and one cousin called it digging a pond with retirement money. From the road, it never looked like much. No gate, no sign, no polished concrete statement piece. Just an engineered basin, plain and useful, built in quiet increments whenever cash allowed. She did not advertise any of this. In Cloud County, announcing your plans was often how you got talked out of them by people with strong opinions and weak memory of your bills. By year 27, she had built the kind of stability no one noticed because it made no noise. Most of what she farmed was either hers outright or structured on terms that did not own her back. What financing she did carry was fixed, purposeful, and small enough not to decide her life in a bad season. She kept conservative reserves and treated cash flow like a crop that needed tending too. She did not call it wealth. She called it staying uncornered. But from a coffee table, all anyone saw was patched knees and rust. The discipline showed most clearly on auction days. At a farm sale near Glasgow, men gathered around a clean, late-model planter with monitor packages and row shutoffs sophisticated enough to fly a plane. Bidding climbed fast, then higher, then absurd. Someone joked it would pay for itself in efficiency. Emma had heard that sentence before every bad debt story in 3 counties. She stood 50 yards away by an older toolbar nobody wanted because the paint was gone and 2 gauge wheels were shot. She had already priced replacements, $780 for both wheels, $440 for hoses, $210 in welding rod, and steel if she did her own reinforcement. She'd brought calipers in her pocket and checked wear before the auctioneer even started. She bought it for $9,600. A dealer rep nearby smirked. "You know there are banks for a reason." Emma signed her slip. And Torca wrenches for a reason, too. Back home, she spent 4 evenings rebuilding the row units. One Saturday calibrating meters with coffee cans and a notebook, and another day running test strips. Her emergence was even. Her stand counts were boringly good. Boring paid. She lived the same way she farmed. Her farmhouse still had the original cabinets. She drove until repairs exceeded replacement value by her definition, not somebody else's image threshold. She bought clothes for durability, not for town. She took vacations mostly as day trips to state parks and came home before chores. Every December, she performed what she called the honest mirror. She listed each machine at realistic resale, not hopeful value. She depreciated hard, then harder. She assigned herself an internal interest rate, often 8% or more, and charged it against every big purchase decision. If an upgrade couldn't beat that hurdle over 10 years, she skipped it. When neighbors rolled machinery, Emma rolled bearings. When they financed convenience, she banked flexibility. And when they teased her for still planting sorghum and alfalfa instead of max corn everywhere, she ran the actual comparison across moisture scenarios. Corn could win big in ideal years. It could also demand too much up front and punish hard when rain missed. Milo and alfalfa were less glamorous, less cocktail party profitable, and less likely to force desperate borrowing in August. "Why not push harder?" a younger farmer asked her once while loading seed. "Because I farm for 20 years at a time," she said. "Not one." Then summer came mean. By June, Reno County and Hutchinson stations were running drought maps every evening, blotched deep red from the western Kansas eastward. By July, allocations in the Republican River Basin were cut, and wells in nearby sections began dropping below pump intake. Center pivots that had spun like clockwork in May started stuttering, then stopping, like watches running out. 2 large operators near Emma took emergency operating loans to drill deeper and keep water moving, one for $640,000, another for $910,000. Both variable, both starting at 9.1%. At the co-op, men who had mocked caution now spoke in clipped voices and stared at moisture forecasts as if glare could summon clouds. Corn leaves curled into tight fists by mid-afternoon. Hauling contractors doubled their rates, and on the county roads, people began to notice a contradiction they did not like. Emma Preston's fields were still stubbornly green. Emma didn't correct anyone. She just kept driving section lines at dawn, checking leaves and soil with a pocket probe, logging moisture depth in a spiral notebook with the same compact handwriting she'd used since her 20s. On 90-degree afternoons, when neighboring corn looked like folded paper, her sorghum stood upright enough to make people slow down on the road and stare. By the second week of July, staring turned into counting. How many pivots she had running, how long they ran, which fields stayed green first, which held color longest, who had seen her on the North Road after dark. At Jitter's Cafe in Concordia, one waitress said she'd heard Emma had outside money. At the parts counter, someone else said she must be pumping off an unreported well. At the co-op, Roger Bell said, with a shrug too theatrical to be innocent, "Numbers don't lie. If everyone's drying down and one place ain't, then either she's lucky or she's leveraged in a way nobody knows." Emma let them talk because she had 30 ledgers at home. They told a story louder than gossip. She could have traced the shape of her wealth with a finger year by year across those ledger spines. 2004, reset year. After Dell died, she sold 2 pieces of tillage iron she didn't need and 1 old stock trailer. Net after repairs and sale costs, $19,800. She put $12,000 into a land fund, $4,500 into emergency cash, and $3,300 into taxes and legal cleanup. She wrote, in the margin, "No emotional purchases for 24 months. 2005. First disciplined buy." An 80-acre tract east of the shelter belt came up from an estate that wanted a quick, clean close. Purchase price, $148,000. She put 35% down from saved cash and side work income, fixed rate 6.1%, 5-year target. She cut living expenses to bare minimum and picked up custom baling. Extra principal paid year 1, $11,200, 2006. Yield average, discipline above average. She sold grain in 4 tranches instead of gambling on a top. Gross margins weren't spectacular, but predictable. Extra principal, $14,600. She also started a separate maintenance sinking fund, $400 a month. Everyone called it fussy. It later paid for 2 engine rebuilds without borrowing. 2007, quiet acceleration. Corn was attractive, inputs climbed, and she did not chase max acres. She held sorghum and alfalfa in rotation, kept fertilizer aligned to soil tests, not coffee shop ego. Paid another $17,900 in principal. Bought used grain truck tires in cash lot at a liquidation sale. Saved roughly $3,200 versus retail. 2008, crisis year for most. Opportunity year for cash buyers. When equipment credit tightened, auctions got strange. She bought that used drill for $11,400, put $3,260 into rehab, and logged every replacement part. She also made the final scheduled payment on the 80-acre note in year 5 and 8 months, ahead of plan. She wrote, "Debt-free land unit number 1, 2009. No parade, just compounding." She redirected the old monthly payment into 2 buckets, land fund and treasury bills. First 12-month treasury purchase, $25,000 at just over 2%. Tiny yield, but liquid and safe. Parking cash, she called it. Neighbors called it timid. 2010, second tract. A retiring couple offered 120 acres with uneven drainage and ugly access. Price, $264,000. Ugly is cheap if you can fix ugly. She put 40% down, fixed note, 7-year ceiling in her head. She spent $18,000 over 2 seasons on contour work and tile repair. Yield variance dropped enough to recover that in under 5 years. 2011, systems year. Started categorizing every cost by controllable versus uncontrollable. Interest moved from finance category into input category on her sheets. That changed decisions. If interest was an input like seed, then avoiding it was production. She skipped upgrading to a newer sprayer and rebuilt pump assemblies instead, $2,140 versus $46,000 financed. 2012. Treasury ladder starts for real. She bought staggered maturities, 3, 6, 12, and 24 months. Small at first, total $110,000. Purpose wasn't return. Purpose was certainty. Taxes and insurance would be covered by maturities even in a crop loss year. She also purchased 60 acres adjoining the home place for $138,000 cash after 2 years of saving for exactly that parcel. 2013, weather miss, no panic, lower yields, no operating note. That distinction mattered. While some neighbors rolled costs into next spring, she cut discretionary spending, deferred non-critical repairs, and stayed current. Treasury maturities covered annual property taxes and farm policy premiums without touching grain inventory. 2014, infrastructure over image. She put 6 figures into water and storage improvements tied to long-term resilience instead of buying visible equipment. People noticed she didn't show up with anything shiny and assumed she was tapped out. In truth, she'd moved cash from one column to another, from vanity optional to drought essential. 2015 to 2017, debt pruning and acreage discipline, paid down the 120-acre note faster each year, $22,000, then $31,000, then a final balloon from retained earnings after a good alfalfa contract. Bought a rough 200-acre parcel in 2 closings from siblings who wanted equalized inheritance checks. Total, $612,000, financed conservatively, retired in 6 years. 2018, machinery temptation cycle. Resisted. Dealers pushed zero-down packages with long tails. She ran 10-year total cost math, including likely sensor failures and software lock-ins. Kept old iron. Put $90,000 into short-term government paper and $40,000 into bin aeration planning. 2019, cash flow stabilization. Built a strict winter carry rule. Enough liquid funds by October to cover 6 months of fixed farm costs and personal living expenses. No exceptions. End-of-year liquid reserves crossed $500,000, though she never said that out loud to anyone. 2020. Shock year everywhere. Supply chain snags. Input volatility, social noise. She pre-bought only what she had storage for and financing for in cash. No speculative hoarding. Her costs rose, but she avoided panic buys on credit. Started tracking replacement lead times as a risk factor in equipment decisions. 2021. High prices, dangerous confidence around her. Many operators expanded hard on optimistic commodity decks. Emma sold into strength in measured increments, paid tax, resisted expansion bids that required optimistic assumptions, added to treasury ladder and money market cash equivalents rather than chasing far acreage at peak prices. 2022, interest rate turn. As rates climbed, variable debt started hurting people quickly. Her existing obligations were small and fixed. She bought a neighboring 160 in a private deal because she could close in 30 days with minimal financing. She also funded grain bin aeration upgrades with a modest fixed lien, purposeful, narrow, not lifestyle debt. 2023, positioning year. By winter, she had most land clear or on terms too small to matter, machinery she understood and could repair, and liquid assets large enough to keep the farm standing through a failure season. She wasn't rich in the performative sense. She was hard to knock over. 2024 now, test year. When rain failed and the rates bit down, Her system did what systems are supposed to do, reduced fragility. If Emma's books looked old-fashioned, her neighbors looked familiar to modern agriculture. Bigger, faster, leveraged. Wade Klein hadn't made stupid choices. He made choices that looked rational during easy years. Corn was strong, lenders were friendly, and scale rewarded fixed cost spread. He leased aggressively, added 2 pivots, and financed high-capacity equipment to match acres he expected to keep. His accountant could justify every move on a 5-year upside case. Then inputs rose faster than projected. Basis moved wrong twice, and 2 weather misses hit in 4 seasons. To keep acres and timing, Wade took an emergency $640,000 operating loan at variable 9.1% when his bank flagged liquidity pressure. He told people truthfully, it's temporary. He believed it. Travis Meeks, south of Jamestown, had done the same at larger size. He was the one with the immaculate machine shed and 2 combines financed in a package, totaling $1.14 million. Payments penciled under strong yield assumptions and moderate interest. Neither held. Repair bills on Tier 4 emission systems were worse than dealer estimates, and parts delays cost him harvest timing. He refinanced once, then again each time stretching years and lowering monthly pain while raising total burden. Nolan Price, younger and sharp, took over family acres and tried to modernize everything at once. Auto-steer upgrades, variable rate bundles, premium seed stack, larger dryer. None of that was foolish by itself. Together, financed in sequence, it narrowed his margin for error to almost nothing. One bad weather window and a policy hiccup on water allotments put him in technical default against covenants tied to debt service coverage. Even Roger Bell, who mostly sold inputs and leased out a few hundred acres, got pinched. He had used short-term business credit for inventory expansion when rates were low. As rates reset, carrying costs climbed and customers delayed payment because they were pinched too. His issue wasn't tractors. It was receivables aging at the same time his line got expensive. At church suppers and funerals, nobody said this cleanly, because pride and fear both hate precision. They said things like tight year and bank being difficult and we're restructuring. What they meant was the same economic math was hitting everybody, but not everybody had the same shock absorbers. The old local model had quietly shifted over a decade, from weather risk plus price risk to weather risk plus price risk plus financing risk. In the cheap money years, that third risk felt abstract. With rates up, it became immediate and personal. Emma did not stand outside that pain and laugh. She had helped Wade pull a calf in sleet. She had brought casseroles when Travis's wife had surgery. She knew these were not reckless cartoon men. They were farmers running strategies optimized for one set of assumptions, then forced to live in another. But she also knew assumptions are liabilities when borrowed money is attached. By late July, the drought stopped behaving like a season and started behaving like an event. The State Water Office posted updated advisories. Local groundwater district meetings went from half-empty to standing room. Republican basin allocations were cut tighter, and emergency language appeared in notices that normally read like bureaucratic wallpaper. Pump tests came back ugly. In some places, the static water level had dropped enough that pumps were pulling air by afternoon peak. Hay moved from expensive to scarce. Bales that had traded around $142 a ton were now changing hands near $268 if you could get them, and quality wasn't guaranteed. Cattlemen in northern townships began hauling water with nurse tanks, burning diesel to move what had once come from a windmill and a shallow well. Then rates bit harder. Variable notes, written as temporary bridge at 9.1%, reset upward with benchmark changes and lender risk repricing. A handful of operations opened renewal letters and saw effective costs north of 10%. For businesses running on thin net margins per acre, that 1-point change wasn't accounting trivia. It was payroll, feed, or fuel. Corn futures jerked on national drought headlines, but local basis and shrink penalties ate much of the upside for farms that couldn't finish crop. Insurance would catch some losses, but indemnity timing lagged cash obligations. Bills were due in months, not in adjuster narratives. The casualties came in paperwork first, then in public. Wade sold one pivot package he'd installed only 3 years earlier, taking a loss after removal and transport. His banker required it to reduce exposure before renewing fall operating credit. He let 2 leased quarters go rather than compete on cash rent he could no longer justify. Travis Meeks listed 1 combine and a Draper header in August, not because he wanted to, but because his lender tightened collateral requirements after mid-season projections deteriorated. He still owed more than market bids wanted to pay. At one point, he stood in the co-op parking lot staring at his phone and said to nobody in particular, "I'm asset-rich on paper and cash-poor in reality." No one argued. Nolan Price missed vendor terms on 2 major input invoices and had to negotiate a split pay plan with penalties. He moved feeder calves early at lighter weights to free feed and water. The sale check plugged one hole and opened another. At the county board, volunteer fire districts quietly asked about backup water sources for brush season because stock ponds were dropping and hydrant pressure in outlying lines was inconsistent during heavy use. The school superintendent in one district raised concerns about well reliability if restrictions tightened further. Everywhere you looked, the same pattern repeated. Obligations fixed, income uncertain, water finite. And in the middle of it, Emma's fields kept refusing the script. Sorghum heads began to emerge where nearby corn had already rolled past recovery. Her alfalfa didn't look lush, but it kept producing enough to cut. Her cattle water looked managed, not desperate. She did not appear frantic, and in a crisis, calm can look like guilt. At the co-op one morning, Wade didn't bother with politeness. "You running a deeper well nobody knows about?" he asked, voice flat. "No." "Then what?" Emma set a box of filters on the counter and signed the ticket. "Planning." Roger Bell snorted. "Planning doesn't make water." "Sometimes it does," she said. That answer traveled faster than any weather report. Within 48 hours, the talk hardened from suspicion to grievance. At Jitters, men said it wasn't fair if one operator had special access. At a township meeting, someone suggested a shared equipment refinance package at 8.75% over 12 years to spread risk and modernize water response. And when Emma declined to join, the refusal was interpreted as proof she was hiding something. By the first week of August, one of the larger stressed operators filed a formal complaint with the state water office alleging likely over-withdrawal on Emma's ground. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday, folded crisp, stamped official. Emma read it once at her kitchen table, then a second time standing up jaw set as the late heat pressed against the window screens, and the radio read another day of triple digits. She reached for her ledger stack. Then for the permit binder she almost never showed anybody, and started making a neat pile on the table. Deeds, meter logs, payment schedules, treasury statements, lien documents, tax receipts, each page a quiet answer to a loud accusation. The next morning, at 8:12, a state truck rolled into Emma's yard. A woman in a khaki field shirt stepped out, clipped badge catching light. "Lila Moreno," she said, offering a hand. "Division of Water Resources. This is Caleb Dunn, metering tech." Emma nodded once. You want coffee before we start? Lila glanced toward the heat already climbing off the gravel. If we do coffee first, we'll lose an hour to politeness. Let's do meters. They began at the registered well on Emma's south quarter. Caleb photographed serial plates, logged static level, checked the totalizer, compared readings against monthly reports. No discrepancy beyond normal tolerance. They moved to the second permitted point. Same story. Then Emma drove them north, past a windbreak and a shallow draw that looked from the county road like nothing more than rough pasture. Up close, it was unmistakably engineered. An earthen berm, clay-lined in layers, with armored spillway, intake screening, and locked meter box. A faded permit placard sat on a post. No decorative sign, no bragging paint, just function. Lila crouched at the meter housing and read numbers twice. You've been reporting off-channel capture under spring runoff rights? Since 2001, Emma said. Expansion permit in 2008 and modification in 2014? Yes. Lila stood, brushed dust off her knees, and looked across the basin. There was water, real water, held calm while the county burned. Capacity? Right now, about 38 acre-feet, Emma said. Depends on silt and season. Roughly 12.4 million gallons when it's full. Caleb let out a low whistle before catching himself. Lila opened her tablet, cross-checked permit IDs, then looked at Emma with the expression of someone mentally rearranging a puzzle she had been handed wrong. Mrs. Preston, this is fully legal as built, as modified, and as metered. Emma gave the smallest shrug. That's why I built it with paperwork first. They did the books at her kitchen table because Lila asked one direct question. To evaluate incentive for non-compliance, I need to understand your debt exposure. Emma brought out binders. Not one tidy folder for show, binders, plural. Land deeds tabbed in blue, debt schedules in red, Treasury ladder statements in green, annual balance sheets initialed by her CPA in Concordia. Lila read in silence for 12 minutes, then passed pages to Caleb, whose eyebrows climbed higher each time. No machinery loans, no operating note, one fixed lien on grain bin aeration upgrades, $74,300 remaining. Treasury and cash equivalents, $1,360,000 across staggered maturities and insured money market accounts. Land, 2,060 acres, owned free and clear, valued conservatively at $5,200 per acre, $10,712,000. Lila asked for one consolidated number. Emma slid over the latest signed statement. Total assets, $12,083,940. Total liabilities, $96,480. Net worth, $11,987,460. The kitchen fan hummed. A dog barked once out by the machine shed. Caleb looked up first. I thought... He stopped. Lila closed the binder carefully, like it was something fragile. For the record, she said, voice official again, there is no evidence of illegal withdrawal, no unpermitted deep well, and no hidden pumping point. Your operation appears materially solvent. Emma almost smiled at the phrase materially solvent, as if solvency were a rock you could weigh. By afternoon, the written finding was filed. By evening, everyone knew. The reaction was worse than accusation. At the co-op, men who had called her broke now called her secretive. Wade stood by the seed pallets, jaw tight. So you could have told people. Told them what? Emma said. That I keep records? That you had options while the rest of us are choking. She held his eyes. I had options because I paid for them 23 years ago when nobody wanted to. Roger Bell tried a laugh that died halfway out. 11 point, whatever million, and driving that truck? It runs, Emma said. Travis Meeks didn't mock. He just looked tired. You got that kind of cushion. You can ride anything. Emma shook her head. Cushion isn't luck, Travis. It's money I didn't spend pretending. He looked away first. The finding should have ended the complaint. Instead, it exposed something people hated more than mystery. Proof that a different model had worked in front of them for years. 3 days later, with heat warnings stacked and stock tanks falling, the Cloud County Conservation District called an emergency meeting in the fairgrounds hall. Folding chairs filled. Ranchers stood along walls. 2 volunteer fire chiefs came in dusty boots, straight from line checks. Lila Moreno attended, not as enforcer now, but as technical witness. The district manager, Doug Hensley, opened with grim numbers, allocation cuts, predicted late summer deficits, livestock water stress. Then he said, Emma Preston has a proposal. She walked to the front carrying 1 yellow legal pad. No speeches, she said. Just terms. She drew a line down the page and read like she was pricing fence wire. From my reservoir allotment, I can release up to 24 acre-feet under emergency transfer protocol if district and state approve the paperwork this week. Of that, 6 acre-feet donated. 2 to Fire District 2 at Jamestown, 2 to Fire District 6 at Simpson, 2 to USD 333's auxiliary school well system, no charge. Remaining 18 acre-feet available to livestock and seed maintenance users at $48 per acre-foot, which is my pumping plus maintenance cost. Not market, not profit. Cost. A murmur moved through the room, shock first, then calculation. She kept going. Transfers are metered. Priority list published daily by district office. No side deals, no cash in parking lots. If you buy from this pool, you file use, purpose, and volume. If you exceed allocation terms, you're out. Doug cleared his throat. Spot hauled equivalents are near $190 per acre-foot right now. Emma nodded. I know. A rancher near the back raised his hand. How much water does 18 acre-feet really buy us? Lila answered before Emma could. About 5.9 million gallons. Another man called out, Why would you do this if you can make more finishing your own crop? Emma didn't bother softening it. Because a county full of liquidated herds and dead seed contracts hurts me next year, too. Discipline first. Then mercy you can meter. That line landed. The vote to authorize emergency pooling passed with 1 dissent. The next week looked like controlled triage. District staff posted transfer windows. Caleb Dunn sat in Emma's yard with a laptop and meter feed, while trucks and portable tanks rotated by schedule. No one got everything they wanted. Everyone got what the sheet said. Fire District 2 filled 2 brush tenders and a portable bladder unit from the donated allotment, enough to stage for 3 weeks of high-risk days without draining municipal lines. Fire District 6 did the same and avoided a planned standby contract that would have cost the township nearly $18,000. USD 333 used its donation to stabilize pressure at the elementary annex and bus barn system during peak restriction days. Classes didn't move, and the superintendent stopped drafting remote day contingencies tied to water failure. Livestock operators took the paid transfers first, 8 of them in round 1, 5 more in round 2. Combined, the 18 acre-feet supported roughly 2,700 head through the worst 49 days of heat and drawdown, enough to avoid a panic sell-off that would have crushed the local auction prices and breeding plans. Emma kept logs on a clipboard. Date, recipient, gallons, meter reading, signature. No photos, no press release. The money help came separately and harder. Nolan Price caught her by the fuel tank one evening, cap in his hands. "I'm not asking for a handout," he said quickly. "I just can't get bank paper fast enough to retrofit before next season. They want 2 years of ratios I don't have after this." Emma wiped grease off her fingers with a rag. "How much? And for what? Exactly?" He had numbers. She respected that. 2 days later, she called 3 young operators to her kitchen with contracts drafted by her attorney in Concordia. 1. Nolan Price, $92,000 zero-interest note, 5-year term, annual principal payments, first payment deferred 12 months. Funds restricted to capacitance moisture probes on 640 acres, telemetry hardware, and low-pressure conversion kits on 1 pivot. Collateral, equipment, UCC filing plus assignment of crop insurance, proceeds up to outstanding balance. 2. Mariah Jensen, farming with her brother Cole on leased and family ground, $81,000 zero-interest note, same term. Used limited to 92-acre drip block installation on high-stress seed plot and pressure-regulated manifolds. Repayment schedule tied to post-harvest settlement dates, not calendar quarter, to match egg cash flow. 3. Luis Ortega Jr., $77,000 zero-interest note for retrofit of 110 acres to subsurface drip plus soil moisture monitoring stations and pump VFD controls. Required quarterly reporting of water use intensity and maintenance logs. Total, $250,000. Emma laid all 3 contracts on the table and said, "Read every line. If you miss payments without calling first, I enforce collateral. This is not theater. I want your farms standing in 10 years, not grateful for 6 months." Mariah read twice, then looked up. "Why trust us?" Emma answered without drama. "I'm not trusting feelings. I'm trusting terms." They signed. By September, early outcomes began showing in numbers, not sentiment. Nolan's probe data cut 2 unnecessary irrigation sets in late vegetative stage on his trial block. Diesel and pump hour savings alone were projected at just over $11,400 annualized with no observed yield penalty in sampled strips. Mariah and Cole's drip block reduced applied water per acre by an estimated 28% against their previous pivot history, while keeping stand uniformity inside contract tolerance. Their seed buyer, who had hinted at pulling acreage, renewed for next season. Luis's VFD and monitoring setup smoothed pressure swings that had been blowing fittings and wasting water in surge cycles. Repairs dropped. More importantly, he stayed within stricter allocation thresholds without shutting down his highest value acres. At district level, Doug Hensley compiled aggregate impact for the board. Emergency pool water distributed, 24.0 acre-feet. Donated public use tranche, 6.0 acre-feet. Cost sale tranche, 18.0 acre-feet at $48 per acre-foot equals $864 recovered, all booked against pumping and maintenance. Estimated hauled water cost avoided by recipients versus $190 per acre-foot alternatives. $3,696 immediate direct savings on the transferred volume, $4,560 equivalent, less $864 cost recovery, plus avoided hauling logistics and downtime. Livestock liquidation avoided, conservative estimate, 1,900 to 2,700 head retained through critical period, preserving breeding value and preventing forced sale price collapse. Public service continuity. 2 volunteer districts maintained brush response readiness. One school system avoided water interruption contingency. Private efficiency financing launched $250,000 in zero-interest notes, enabling conversion projects expected to reduce combined annual water application by roughly 70 to 95 acre-feet once fully operational and tuned. The board minutes were dry reading. The impact was not. Later that month, Lila Moreno returned for a compliance closeout and found Emma at the machine shed replacing a hydraulic hose on the same museum-grade planter everyone liked to mock. "Wanted to give you this in person," Lila said, handing over final documentation. Complaint dismissed. Full compliance affirmed. Emergency transfer commended. Emma tucked the papers into a toolbox. "Appreciate it." Lila hesitated, then said, "I've done this job 12 years. Most people spend fortunes trying to look secure. You spent years being secure and looked poor on purpose." Emma tightened the fitting with one clean pull. "Not on purpose. Just didn't see the point in paying interest for applause?" Down the road, a stock trailer rattled past, full but not overloaded. In the distance, one of the volunteer brush trucks idled by a tank, topping off without panic. The drought had not broken. Heat still leaned on every field in the county. But the shape of the crisis had changed, from blind scramble to managed shortage, and that change had a ledger behind it. Not luck, not rumor, lines on paper, signed on time, and a reservoir most people had driven past for years without ever asking what quiet preparation was worth. The next morning of harvest, Emma stood on the scale at dawn with a yellow notepad and watched the first grain truck creep up, tarp flapping like a loose shirt cuff in the wind. The screen on the scale house printer spat numbers in short, chattering bursts. Moisture, test weight, shrink, net. Her sorghum wasn't a record year. She knew that before the ticket cooled in her hand. But it was clean, contractable, and profitable. At 10:30, her CPA, Martin Sells, called from town. "I ran your side-by-side," he said. "Maximum private use scenario versus what you did with transfers." Emma held the phone between shoulder and ear while she tightened a tarp strap. "How ugly?" "Ugly depends on your theology," Martin said. Papers rustled. "If you'd held every gallon and finished all priority acres at your own optimum, projected gross margin lift was around $412,000. Actual with transfers and donated tranche, you're still positive and safe. You gave up upside, not survival." Emma stared over the yard toward the north draw where her reservoir sat flat and gray-blue in the heat haze. "Write it in the file as tuition." "Tuition? For a county I still have to live in." Martin went quiet for a beat, then laughed once. "You're a difficult client." "I'm a paid-up one." That afternoon, she drove to Nolan Price's west quarter, where sensor flags dotted the field like bright survey pins, orange, lime, and white, each tied to a probe location. Nolan jogged over from the pivot panel, phone in hand. Sweat had dried white at his collar. "You got a minute?" he asked. Emma nodded. Nolan unlocked a weatherproof box and pulled a tablet from a bracket. He brought up a chart, soil moisture at different depths, plotted by day. "See this?" he said, stabbing the screen. "This dip looked bad to me at first. Old me would have irrigated right there. But 12-inch held, 24 held. We waited 16 hours. Saved a whole set." "How much diesel?" "About 11,400 projected across this block if trends hold. Maybe a touch more with current prices." He looked at her, then back at the chart. "I used to irrigate because I was scared. Now I irrigate because numbers say yes." Emma tipped her cap. "Scared water is expensive water." Nolan grinned despite himself. I made your first annual payment this morning, by the way. It won't clear the whole principal schedule yet, but I sent what contract says. I saw the deposit alert. He shoved his hands in his pockets. Thanks for making it a contract. That's why you'll finish paying it. As she walked back to the truck, Nolan called out, "Hey, Emma." She turned. "When this note's done, I'm starting a reserve account first, before I buy anything shiny." Emma gave him a thumbs up and kept walking. 2 days later, Mariah and Cole Jensen sat in the seed buyer's temporary office trailer, boots muddy from a dawn check on their drip block. A box fan rattled in the corner. The buyer, a man named Keenan, with a ballpoint clipped to his collar, flipped through lab sheets. "Uniformity's inside tolerance," he said. "Better than I expected with this year's stress." Mariah slid a map across the desk. "Pressure-regulated manifolds, stage cycles, and we quit guessing. We're not burning water at noon because somebody feels nervous." Keenan looked up. "You're asking to renew same acreage." Cole shook his head. "Asking to expand by 30 next year if you'll take it." Keenan leaned back, thinking. "Most folks came in here this season asking for exceptions. You came in with data." Mariah tapped the contract packet. "And financing terms that force us to keep records good enough to survive a bank audit." Keenan signed the renewal page. "Done. Same base plus performance kicker if stand and purity hold." Outside, Mariah stood in the gravel lot and let out a breath she'd been carrying for months. Cole bumped her shoulder. "You gonna tell Emma before I do?" Mariah already had her phone out. "I owe her more than a text. We're taking her a copy in person." That evening, they found Emma in her machine shed packing wheel bearings. Mariah handed over the signed renewal and a check stub for their first scheduled payment under the zero-interest note. Emma read the top line, then the bottom. "On time," she said. Cole smiled. 3 days early. "Don't make a habit of late, and we won't need celebrations." She tucked the documents into a folder marked Jensen, term note. "You two did the work." Mariah shook her head. "We did it with a chance." Emma set the folder down. "A chance is only useful if somebody treats it like responsibility." Luis Ortega Jr. called after sundown on a Friday when the sky was copper and hard as kiln brick. "My pressure line's hunting again," he said. "Not catastrophic, but I want it right before the next heat pulse." Emma drove over with a flashlight and a crescent wrench. Luis met her at the pump station, where the new variable frequency drive hummed low and steady. He pointed to the gauge, swinging 3 psi every 40 seconds. Emma watched one full cycle, then another. "Your feedback line is lagging. Sensors reading old water." Luis crouched beside the panel. "So relocate? Or shorten delay logic in the controller? Do both." They worked shoulder to shoulder for an hour, sweat and mosquitoes and dust sticking to everything. When they restarted the system, the gauge steadied into a narrow band. Luis laughed, pure relief. "There it is." He pulled a folded envelope from his shirt pocket. "First quarter report and payment receipt copy." Emma took it and clicked her flashlight off. "Quarterly reporting's what keeps you honest under stress." Luis nodded toward the dark rows. "My dad always said you can tell a farm's future by how it acts at midnight. Tonight, mine feels like it has one." By the time Emma got home, the kitchen clock read 11:42. She logged Luis's payment, scanned his report, and wrote one line in her notebook. 3 notes, current. Discipline is contagious. The multiplier showed up where nobody photographed it. On a windy Monday, Fire District 2 ran a brush fire drill along a dry ditch line near Jamestown. Chief Aaron Pike stood by the tanker, while volunteers unrolled hose. Charge line, he yelled. The pump bit immediately. No sputter, no pressure fall-off. After they wrapped, Aaron found Emma leaning against her truck. That donated tranche you gave us? He said. Bought us readiness we couldn't have budgeted. We didn't pull from town hydrants once during Red Flag Week. He looked embarrassed for a second, then pushed through it. You saved us an $18,000 standby contract. Township board voted to put half that into a permanent emergency water reserve. Good, Emma said. Use panic money before panic starts. At $333 annexed, the maintenance supervisor, Mr. Tillman, shirt sleeves rolled and clipboard tucked under one arm, showed Emma the pressure logs from the school well system. Oh, we didn't drop below safe threshold once after the transfer, he said. No closures, no rotating fountains. Kids had normal days. Emma signed the final delivery acknowledgement. As she turned to leave, a second-grade class filed past on the sidewalk, each kid carrying a construction paper sunflower. One little boy looked at her muddy boots and whispered loudly to his friend, "She smells like tractors." Emma, who had faced bank officers and drought maps and public suspicion, laughed so hard she had to stop and put a hand on the truck bed. By November, when combines were parked and invoices stacked on kitchen tables across Cloud County, the county board held a public budget hearing. Usually it drew a few retirees and whoever had a complaint about roads. That night, the room was full. Doug Hensley stood at the lectern and clicked to a slide titled Drought Response, Costs Avoided and Capacity Built. He read numbers, real ones, head retained, fire readiness hours, school continuity days, private retrofit acres installed, projected water use reductions for next season. Then he did something unusual for Doug. He stepped away from the lectern. This county got through the worst stretch because one operator built capacity early and chose to share it under rules, he said. We can either call that exceptional and pray for another Emma, or build policies so resilience isn't a personality trait. He introduced a proposal, a Reservoir co-op fund, voluntary, audited, with cost-share grants for legal off-channel storage, sensor networks, and low-pressure distribution upgrades. Priority to operators carrying sustainable debt ratios and submitting transparent repayment or reserve plans. A hand shot up in the back. Wade Klein. What's initial capitalization? Wade asked. Doug glanced at Emma in the second row. If we raise $500,000 privately and through district commitments, Emma Preston has offered a matching grant up to $500,000. The room went still. Not because they doubted she had it anymore, because now they understood what it cost to build it. The first person to stand after Doug's announcement was Travis Meeks. He walked to the center aisle without notes, face raw in the fluorescent light. I filed that complaint, he said, against Emma. A rustle moved through the chairs. Travis kept going. I told myself I was protecting fairness. Truth is, I was scared and mad and upside down. I thought if her numbers were fake, mine wouldn't look so bad. They were real. Mine were still mine. He swallowed. I sold one combine, restructured the other, and gave up acres I couldn't service. I'm not bankrupt. I'm not comfortable either. But I'm done pretending variable debt is a weather plan. He turned to Emma directly. I was wrong. Emma held his gaze. Then do the work wrong people avoid. Put your books where your mouth is. He nodded once. I already brought them. At the back table, Travis's banker lifted a cardboard file box like evidence. Even Roger Bell, who had built a career on confident talk, raised his hand and said into the mic, I want in on the fund committee, and I'll post true 10-year ownership costs on every major input package I sell from here out, not just sticker price. No one clapped. It wasn't that kind of moment, but nobody laughed either. Spring came late and cold the next year, with a rain that smelled like iron on dry dirt and made the whole county breathe easier. At the co-op coffee table, the weather radio still hissed, but the conversation had changed. Men now argued about debt service coverage and pump efficiency curves with the same intensity they once reserved for horsepower. Wade Klein arrived in a used single rear-wheel truck, no dealer plates, no show chrome, and carried a spiral notebook with tabbed sections. He slid into a chair beside Emma. "You got a minute to look at this?" he asked. She took the notebook. Inside were handwritten tables: per acre gross, per acre variable, fixed costs, and a new line he had underlined twice: interest, treat as input. Emma handed it back. "You did your own depreciation?" "Market value, not wishful." "Good." Wade rubbed his jaw. "I sold the dually, kept core ground, let 2 high rent quarters go. Still hurts." "Hurt and fatal aren't the same." He nodded. "I sleep better, though. Didn't expect that." Roger Bell started pinning laminated true cost cards above product displays at the co-op. Sticker carrying cost assumptions at multiple rates, projected 10-year total. Some customers hated it. More thanked him quietly after the first shock wore off. "I make less on impulse," Roger told Emma one afternoon as they stood by the filters. "But I lose fewer customers to bad decisions. Turns out longevity as a sales strategy." Travis Meeks joined the Reservoir Co-op Fund Oversight Committee and, to everyone's surprise, became its strictest hawk on transparency. He insisted every grant recipient publish annual performance and repayment status. "If we're going to preach discipline," he said at one meeting, tapping a spreadsheet projected on the wall, "we don't get to hide the misses." Nolan Price made every payment on his note on schedule and added a separate reserve account that hit 6 figures by year 3. He still ran hard, but now he ran with margins. Mariah and Cole Jensen finished their first note year clean, expanded their drip-managed seed acreage, and hired 1 full-time employee from town, steady payroll where there had been seasonal uncertainty before. Luis Ortega Jr. became the unofficial midnight call fixer for sensor and VFD problems across 2 townships. He carried a multimeter, a laptop, and a discipline inherited from contract reporting. By his final payment year, he had reduced water application intensity enough that his lender cut risk premium on his operating terms. Lila Marino was promoted to regional compliance lead and used Cloud County's emergency pool model as a case study at state trainings: how legal infrastructure plus transparent governance can prevent panic extraction and conflict spirals. Caleb Dunn left state metering to work directly for the Conservation District under Doug Hensley, building a local telemetry dashboard where operators could voluntarily share water use efficiency data anonymously by zone. Adoption was slow at first, then steady once people saw practical value. Doug, who used to spend meetings begging for attendance, now had to set up extra chairs. The Reservoir Co-op Fund hit its first private-public matching threshold in 14 months. Emma wrote the match check exactly as promised. No naming rights, no plaque, just a signature and a memo line. Resilience, not rescue. At the courthouse records office, more filings appeared for narrow, purposeful liens: sensor systems, drip conversions, storage upgrades, while long-tail vanity equipment notes declined, not vanished. Farming was still farming, but the ratio shifted. Emma kept farming. She replaced the cracked windshield only after a winter rock strike made the wipers chatter. She kept the same patched coverall habit because patching still cost less than replacing. The old planters stayed in service with rebuilt row units and fresh chains every season. One of the younger mechanics at the co-op joked that machines should be in a museum. Emma answered, "Museums don't plant 1,100 acres on schedule." Her net worth moved with land values and markets, but Martin's annual statement still showed what mattered. Liabilities small, liquidity strong, risk spread with intent. Around town, people stopped saying she was rich like an accusation and started saying she was stable like a compliment. On a mild October afternoon, she drove to the Concordia Cemetery with a folding chair and a thermos of black coffee. Del Preston Stone sat half in shade under a cottonwood. She unfolded the chair, poured coffee into the lid, and set Martin's latest balance sheet on her knee. "Dad," she said aloud because grief doesn't require witnesses, "we held it." Wind moved through dry grass. Somewhere down the slope, a mower droned. She told him about the fund, about Nolan's reserve account, about Wade's notebook line item, about Travis admitting the complaint in public. She told him she still heard that banker saying liquidity as if it were a verdict, and how she had spent decades turning that word into a tool instead. When she stood to leave, she tapped the top of the stone with 2 fingers, practical as a handshake. Back at home, she parked beside the shed as dusk settled violet over the fields. A pump clicked on in the distance, low and controlled. Somewhere farther north, water moved through a line built before anyone asked for it. The farm still operated, the ledger still balanced, the philosophy still held. By the 5th year after the drought, documentary crews did what documentary crews do, arrived with clean boots, asked if Emma could walk us through her genius, and tried to frame a single season as a miracle. Emma gave them one morning, no more. A producer asked, "So the drought made you wealthy?" Emma snorted. "No, the drought revealed what was already paid for." He tried again. "What's the secret, then?" She pointed toward the field edge where an old toolbar sat greased and ready. "Price interest like fertilizer. Buy less ego. Build storage before panic, and don't confuse quiet with broke." That line made the final cut. One June dawn, years after the red map summer, the co-op coffee table looked almost the same. Same scorched pot, same weather radio hiss, same men in caps comparing forecasts. But when a young operator asked whether he should finance a bigger rig because payments look manageable, nobody answered with a grin and a dealership brochure. Wade asked, "Manageable at what rate?" Roger asked, "Show 10-year total, not monthly." Travis asked, "What happens if rain misses twice?" Nolan said, "What's your reserve after harvest?" Mariah added, "What does water cost where you are, honestly?" The young man blinked, then laughed nervously. "I just asked about a tractor." Emma, standing at the counter with black coffee in a foam cup, said without turning around, "You asked about your future. Same question." Outside, her truck, new windshield, same faded paint, waited in the gravel. She climbed in, drove north past shelter belts and section lines, and turned toward the low draw that most people now recognized for what it was. Not luck, not loophole, not hidden money, but a man-made margin against hard years. The reservoir lay still under first light, surface smooth as sheet metal, holding sky and wind and the reflected outline of a woman who had never once needed applause to be right. In Cloud County, they used to point at Emma Preston as a warning story. Now they pointed at her books,